April 26th is the anniversary date of the world's worst nuclear power accident. On that date, in 1986, the Chernobyl 4 reactor outside of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, literally blew itself apart. For days, the resulting fire spread the reactor's radioactive contents around the world. Literally every country north of the equator receives some of the radioactive fallout, estimated to have the radiation equivalent of over 400 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs. Most conversations about Chernobyl today quickly devolve into mind-numbing controversial statistics about how many really died, how much radiation escaped, how many billions of rubles the accident cost, blah, blah, blah. Lost in this maze of numbers are the people, those hundreds of thousands of victims violently wrenched away from the land of their birth and life by the accident. Today's guest has taken upon herself to force the world to acknowledge the pain and the loss of some of these nameless people. Irene Zabytko wrote a fictional account in 2000 about old people who astonishingly voluntarily returned to the heavily contaminated areas around the now silenced reactors. She now is in the process of completing a documentary about the experiences of the real people who are returning to the Chernobyl region to complete a chronicle of life in the dead zone. So I'd like to welcome Irene Zabytko.
Thank you.
And not just welcome to the show, but actually welcome back to Chicago.
Yes, thank you.
So you're a homie.
I am, although Chicago has changed so very, very much over the years, so it's not even really my Chicago anymore, which is probably good.
And you grew up where?
In the West Side, well, now called Ukrainian Village, but at the time I was growing up, we called it the Yuki Ghetto, so so a lot has changed.
The Yuki Ghetto. And at what point did you leave Chicago?
I left in the 70s and I was in college and I wanted to explore the world, and Chicago was too small, especially my neighborhood, and it was great to hear, to go beyond where the Ukrainians were. I love the Ukrainians, but I also thought it was time to move on and explore different cultures and have different adventures, and so I was doing that for several years. Ended up in Boston and Vermont for a while, did the back to the land thing, and then ended up in Florida of all places. You can tell by my tan, how well adapted I am to Florida.
Right. Now, when you were studying in school, did you have it in your mind that you were going to be an author and write books?
No, not at all. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a scientist or something along, I was a major in biology at Loyola University, and I dropped out and felt miserable about that. But always loved writing, always loved English literature in particular, and always loved the Russian masters, Dostoevsky and Gogol, who was actually Ukrainian. Actually, it wasn't until the women's movement, and I was able to think that maybe I could be a writer as well. So, and then that happened, and it was a long process. And I realized fiction is my first love, and I wrote short stories, had some published, and like a drug addict, I kept going at it, thinking, this is great, I can do more. And eventually I did more, and the first being the novel about Chernobyl.
And as I said in the intro, you did write this book that came out in 2000.
2000, called The Sky Unwashed. And the title comes actually from a poem by the Ukrainian national poet Taras Shevchenko. And Taras Shevchenko was a serf during the Tsarist regime around the 1840s. And he was exiled because he wrote in Ukrainian. And he was a very well-educated, on his own person, and a great poet. And wrote in Ukrainian, and that was an offense to the Tsar and to the, he was called the Malo-Ruski people at the time, so the Little Russians. He did something very treacherous and treasonous and was sent away in exile, forbidden to write, but he did anyway. And he wrote a poem, very melancholic poem called The Sky Unwashed, which he talks about, here I am, exiled, and I'm yearning for my home. And so basically I use that as a double entendre, the sky unwashed being, of course, a metaphor for Chernobyl, and also because the women in my novel are about women who leave their home, are forced to leave, and want to return back to their home.
Well, for the benefit of the viewers, we're finding that as time goes on, memories not only fade, but cultural knowledge just doesn't get transmitted. And this is 23 years down the road already, and already people are wondering, well, what was Chernobyl and what was 3 Mile Island? Let me just ask you, the old, where were you when JFK got shot? Well, where were you when the Chernobyl accident happened in 1986?
1986, I was actually at a feminist conference in Yugoslavia, in Dubrovnik, and even they knew about what was going on. And of course, they knew I'm an American, but they also knew I was a Ukrainian. So my colleagues at the time said, you know, there's something odd going on in your ancestral country. I said, what? They didn't have all the facts at the time, of course, because they were, of course, under Soviet influence as well. But even they knew that something odd and mysterious and treacherous was happening.
Odd and mysterious and treacherous. We have some slides we'd like to put up now in some sequence here to get across the magnitude of the devastation. This was a 4-reactor complex, one of the largest in Ukraine. In fact, several months before, Chernobyl Reactor 4 was previewed in Soviet Life magazine as the model of the state of the art. And the building just literally blew itself apart.
Right.
And the photographs show just utter devastation. The fire raged for days, and as we said in the intro, 400 Hiroshima's worth of radiation got spewed around not just Ukraine, but the surrounding countryside. And we have a map that illustrates some of the hot spots throughout the area, which were severely contaminated. Have you been to any of the zone areas other than around Kiev at all?
Yes, I have. And unfortunately, the only place I didn't get a chance to go to and would love to go is Pripyat, which is where a lot of the workers lived. And I'm told that's a whole experience of and of itself, because it's a ghost town, literally. And of course, you probably have seen pictures of discarded clothing and people leaving in a hurry and thinking they're going to come back and never did. So maybe next time we'll go there. But my real focus was really not so much on the people who left, but on the people who returned. So we were exploring the surrounding villages around the called the Dead Zone, the 32-kilometer radius surrounding the nuclear power plant of Chernobyl. And there are many, many, many villages that were irradiated and evacuated, but very much after Chernobyl exploded. So that was my real focus in visiting those areas. And I also did, last time I was there was last year to film, we also went to see the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl. And you're right, in first, my thoughts were when I first came onto this huge premise, I guess. It was incredible because it was huge and it looked like a Soviet progressive, this is the wave of the future kind of place. And nobody was there except myself and my film crew. We saw a few workers here and there, but not very many. And but I was thinking, my goodness, they must have put in a lot of rubles in this place. I mean, it was truly impressive. I mean, that was reactor number 4 that blew up. There are many other reactors there, and part of it is still functioning as a nuclear power plant. But it is massive, and it's huge. And you walk around there, and you can see it's like a little city unto itself. So it was quite interesting. I can see how the Soviets are very proud of that.
When I see pictures of Pripyat, and folks can actually Google it or go on YouTube and see different films of Pripyat itself, it reminded me of the closing sequences of Neville Shute's, the movie based on Neville Shute's book, On the Beach, where nuclear war wipes out humanity and all the streets are deserted. Pripyat, it's a dead ringer for the closing sequences of the movie that came out of that book. The accident has also, engendered all kinds of controversy and myths versus realities kind of thing. One of the more prominent one is the death toll. I don't know how you react to that or not, but the official death toll is now 55.
Oh, is it 50? It went up.
It went up from 31, yes.
Oh, I thought it was 32. I'm sorry. Yeah, 31, yes. It just angers me. I mean, that's an absolute lie, and everybody knows it in Ukraine, certainly, and when I talk to people or even officials who are giving us a tour of the nuclear power plant, of course it's more than that, but they're not allowed to say anything. And it's just typical of the lies and the myth, and they would rather forget about Chernobyl, actually. I mean, the government people that I've spoken to who would speak to me would just, oh, it's not a big deal, or we would talk to people about Chernobyl, and the reaction would be, well, people are saying they're from the nuclear reactor explosion so they can get money from the government, so it's an extortion thing that people are doing and milking it. And it's just such a cynical attitude.
You and I were at different conferences on the 20th anniversary. You said you were in Washington at the UN.
Yes, Washington, D.C. Yes.
And I was in Kiev itself, actually, they had a alternative conference across the street from the official United Nations conference about Chernobyl 20. And we did have a poster, a German poster, that we might put up as also coincided with the conference. But it was at this meeting where one of the most important statements I've ever heard about the accident really occurred. Professor Dr. Dmitry Hrodzinski, who was a member of the Ukrainian National Academy of Sciences, National University of Kiev, very eloquently just said, look, the accident is over, but the catastrophe is beginning. And I think it gets to the fact that this accident is not finished because the sky is not totally unwashed yet. The fallout, the contamination zones, the ingestion of food, and all the controversies around that. This makes nuclear accidents, I think, more qualitatively different than other kinds of accidents. You put out fires, plane crashes, you bury the dead, it's over. This seems to be going on and on and on in Ukraine, in Belarus.
Sure. Yes, absolutely in Belarus. I think they've got the worst of it. When the winds blew, it blew over to that part of the border and to that country, and unfortunately the people are really, really still very much devastated by Chernobyl and the after effects. Yes, and you see that in hospitals. You see a lot of children who are having more birth defects. There are statistics, yes, the Ukrainian government is keeping tabs on that at least, and a lot of children are born with congenital heart disease, an inordinate proportion of that. If you saw the movie Chernobyl Heart, you'll know what that's all about. A lot of children also have thyroid conditions. And how can you deny that there is any association between the two? So there is a lot of that still going on.
It's a similar situation with smoking we were discussing, that you can't really prove that smoking caused the cancer, but the preponderance of other evidence.
Yeah, you can make your conclusions. Yeah, I think so.
But you're right, our experience in 2006 was that the Ukrainian government, the Belarusian government, the Russian government were ready to say, it's over, you can buy our produce now, everything's fine,
That's right.
Go eat mushrooms, let's move on, was
That's
kind of the attitude.
True.
Now, what was the transition for you between a fictional account and getting to the real people?
Oh, well, because I'm fascinated by Chernobyl, and it doesn't go away. I always meet survivors from Chernobyl, one way or another, and during my book tour, people always ask me, have you ever been there? What kind of research did you do? No, I've never been there, and I really didn't do much research aside from the fact of hearing, what was going on in the news at the time and afterwards, and also reading and hearing about some first-person accounts of the survivors and the first responders and the people who came back. That was the most interesting to me. And I read that in an article in a paper called The Ukrainian Weekly. And these women came to a village called Opachichi, which is what my novel is based on. And there were these women living there. And they came back because they had nowhere else to go after the fallout. Their pensions were never being given to them wherever they were evacuated to. They were not welcomed where they were. And they said, well, I have a home, I might as well go back to it. And they are still there. Now, so many have died, of course. Opachichi it's a village of, I think it was I don't remember, 500, it's in the movie. But now there are only 19 survivors. And they're all in their 80s, and they're mostly women. So I was very interested in that. And a fiction writer, the fiction writer always asks, wow, what if? What happens? I mean, yes, there are a lot of statistics, a lot of scientific journals and books and very good accounts of what happened at Chernobyl and honest accounts. But I'm more interested in the humanistic side of things. That's the fiction writer in me. Okay, the people come back, what happens? I mean, well, how do they survive? What do they do? What do they think? Who are these people? So it kind of manifested, it started out as a short story, and then it grew into a novel, because I was so fascinated by them. I wanted to know what happens next, and what if, other people came? What if other villagers started the village again? How do they survive their own lives despite this horrible, horrible cataclysmic event? So it grew into a novel, and which is what it is now. So, but I always wanted to go back and meet the real life people who inspired this book to begin with.
And so now you are.
And so now I am, yeah.
And the documentary, Life in the Dead Zone,
has
been begun, at least.
At least begun.
And we have a short clip, actually, from the trailer for the product so far, so we'd like to roll that now. And,
In 2000, I published a novel called The Sky Unwashed, which is about a group of elderly women who return to their deserted and highly contaminated village in the Dead Zone, the area surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the site of the world's worst nuclear accident. Those surrounding mostly rural areas were highly irradiated after the core of reactor number 4 exploded on April 26, 1986 at 1:23 a.m., causing fires, a nuclear meltdown, and sending out a radioactive cloud that blanketed Ukraine, Belarus, Scandinavia, and Western Europe. The official Soviet death toll was 31 people. However, it is assumed that the more truthful toll is around 25,000. The Ukrainian Health Ministry now estimates that 2.4 million Ukrainians suffer various health problems from exposure that is most probably linked to this disaster. My novel is based on a newspaper article that I came across in the August 5, 1990 issue of the Ukrainian Weekly, a few years after the explosion. The article documented and featured how several elderly people chose to return to Opachichi, a village near Chernobyl, to reclaim and live in their ancestral abandoned homes despite a government ban of anyone living in the Dead Zone, the 30-kilometer radius surrounding Chernobyl, which is made up of several abandoned villages. Since the article's publication in 1990, more elderly have since returned and are still living there on their pensions despite the fact that Chernobyl is among the most radioactive area on the planet, the fallout damage being roughly the equivalent of 400 Hiroshima nuclear bombs. My novel, The Sky Unwashed, features these elderly Chernobyl survivors who return to a fictional village modeled after Opachichi. Like the real-life survivors, my characters were determined to return to their homes because they had nowhere else to go, and they desired to die on their land despite the contamination. In my novel, my fictional characters do not fare well. I want to see whether the real-life people do. In the pre-production phases of my new documentary, Life in the Dead Zone, I was finally able to meet the people I had fictionalized so long ago. The next phase is to collect funds for the actual production of the film.
So these people remind me to a certain extent of the Japanese hibakusha, the way you describe it here, where the hibakusha are not accepted in Japanese society. There's a huge stigma on them. Is that the situation with Ukrainians?
Absolutely, sure, yeah. In fact, many still think they're going to catch some sort of Chernobyl-related disease if they're in any way connected or meet up with these people of the zone. Very much so, yeah. And again, you know, the cynicism of the country is such that, well, you say you're from Chernobyl, I don't believe you, you're just trying to, again, milk the government for money. And so it's that attitude as well. So it's a sort of a contempt either way.
And the government, supposedly it's illegal to go into the zone, but
yes.
Are they doing anything to...
No, they're not. And it's interesting because a lot of people now are actually, not even the elderly people that do have homes there. There are other people, because of the bad economic situation in Ukraine, many people are going there because they don't have anywhere to live. And in fact, there is an excellent documentary called From Chechnya to Chernobyl. And actually, these are people not going to Ukraine, but to Belarus. And these are refugees from Chechnya escaping to the irradiated zone in Belarus because they think it's safer and quieter. And many people are doing that in Ukraine as well. We don't hear much about that. And there are a lot of criminal activity types going as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So from what I hear, I haven't seen that up front myself.
You mentioned earlier, and I've had some personal experience with this, with the Chicago Ukrainian community, that a lot of people just really want to forget this. And so we have been closed out from getting any information or talking to people who come to Chicago about the accident. How did these people in these communities receive you when you come? What's their attitude towards you?
Oh, they were welcoming. I mean, as soon as we walked in, they wanted to give us something to eat. They gave us mushrooms, their vodka, the samohan as they call it. I mean, you know, the usual Ukrainian hospitality, of course. I mean, they're very poor as well, but they are willing to give whatever they have. As you know, I mean, it would be insulting not to accept anything.
Often their best.
Absolutely, you know, they'll say that for guests, and they are very animated and open, and absolutely are interested in talking to people. I mean, they're very lonely. I mean, they have their little close-knit community, but they're very lonely for visitors. And we, as you saw, we were there in the winter, so even more so. And they were open about what happened to them, and love to talk about it. And I think, and not shy. And And the reason being is that lots of people have visited them already. A lot of newscasters, there have been many NPR reporters coming in, and scientists coming in as well. So they're used to talking to people pretty much.
They almost sound more like specimens, though, than
pretty
people.
much, but they don't mind it. And I asked, well, do you mind, if we talk about what happened to you? But I think it's cathartic for them to talk about what happened and how they were treated and mistreated. And then they just want to know what's going on in the world. But many are not bitter. Some were, but many are just sort of, well, this is just one more thing we had to deal with, and that's very Ukrainian.
What sort of support or compensation are they still getting? Are they still getting Chernobyl benefits?
I believe so. And after Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko came into office, she's having some troubles right now with the president, Yushchenko. However, she really helped getting their pensions back, which was their big concern. For many, many years, they were without their pensions. And I guess they had to get money from the relatives. Many were evacuated with family members who chose not to return with them. So they were, in fact, every house I went to had a huge poster of Yulia Tymoshenko, and they were so grateful to her. They blessed her name, and they told me, have a good year, and we blessed Yulia, and we bless you too.
Orange has a different connotation there than it does here, I guess.
I think it still does, yeah.
Has there been any response from the diaspora communities, the Ukrainian communities in Toronto, Chicago, to these people?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if it wasn't for them, in particular, the Ukrainian Women's League, the Soyuzyanka, they were the ones who actually came there and wrote about these women living in the zone and send them packages and aid. So they've been incredibly helpful to all of the Chernobyl victims, not only to the ones who were displaced, but also children and getting medical equipment. I mean, tremendous, tremendous help.
Now, your project, where are you at with it in terms of the documentary itself?
It's so hard. Where are we at? It's so expensive. It's not like writing a book and you're in your own little room and, if you have a computer, you're very lucky and there you go. You have to have a crew, you have to have equipment, you have to have travel money, you have to have time, you have to be able to have, a place to sleep and eat, not only for yourself, but for the crew. We slept at the Chernobyl Hilton, which is what I call it. There's a hotel in the town of Chernobyl. Oh. So we were there. But, that costs money, and of course you have to pay people to take you there and back. So all of this adds up. We were there twice, and we were able to film a short feature called Epiphany at Chernobyl, because we were there during the feast day of Epiphany, the blessing of water, which is very interesting because they use their contaminated water to be blessed. And we hope to go back and continue the actual full-length documentary. How long is this going to take? I don't know, because of funding cuts and people are not giving in the way they used to. We're hoping if we finish it in 2 years, that would be a miraculous event.
2 years?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the Epiphany short, and that I would like to point out is on your website, right? And
no, not yet.
Oh, it's not on the website.
No, we're still. Well,
okay.
The reason is that we're still shopping it around to film festivals, and sometimes we can't. It can't be previewed in that way, but we will go viral eventually with that because it's a great film, and we really want people to know about it. And we bring them into the village, and we see the community of Chernobyl.
I will mention also that at the end of the show, when we run the trailers, that your website will appear if people do want to find out more about either of these in the future. They'll be there. So you made this progression from Chicago Yuki teen to a writer, and you left the sciences behind, and now you're a filmmaker. And what has been the effect of all this on you? I mean, where are you heading? What's the next steps?
It's crazy. Who chooses to be a writer? I mean, really, or a filmmaker? Really? I mean, I guess people do make those conscious choices, but I think because I went into film, not because I know anything about film, although I love documentaries and love to watch movies, but because I've been approached by so many people, we're going to make a movie out of your book, and then nothing happens. So I thought to myself, okay, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself. It's such an arrogant thing to do. It really is. But now I'm in it, and I love it, and I love the process of it. And when we're able to be there with the women in particular, it's incredibly satisfying, and we're doing something, I think, very positive about something that was very negative. And bringing to the consciousness again about Chernobyl, it still lingers. There's still radioactive activity going on in the world, not only in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, but throughout the world. We're all affected by Chernobyl. And I think we need to also hear the humanistic side of it and these people's stories and why they are so willing to come back and live on a contaminated plot of land. You know, what is that about home? And also the time when I was writing and also filming, being from Chicago certainly, but also being sort of homeless and transient too. You know, I always wonder, what is home? You know, that whole. So you know, there are several metaphors to this project, I think.
Earlier on, I was trying to get across the point. This is much more a human side to the whole thing, and of course there are other organizations that deal with the aspects of the accident, like Chernobyl Children's Project in Belarus, Children of Chernobyl Project in Ukraine, focusing in on the effects on children over time. Do you consider yourself an activist, or are you?
Yes, I consider myself an activist, and I think this is my activism, the writing and talking about Chernobyl. I mean, when I'm invited to events, people want to know about Chernobyl, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about my book and the film, but also about Chernobyl. So in that respect, yeah, I think I am.
What would you like for these people?
For the older people that I'm meeting, good health. They're not healthy. More good luck. And to know that somebody cares about them, that somebody finds them worthy enough to hear their stories and send it out to the world, because they don't believe that.
So in a way, you're sort of a historian too, preserving a piece of the truth for the future,
I
so
hope
to speak.
so. Okay, that's a good title,
Okay.
sure.
I mean, your book stands in contrast to some of the reports from here and the official accounts.
Yeah, well, that's okay. It's actually an honor, because those truths and quotes, you know, that's ridiculous. That's fiction more than my book. My book is more truthful and more of a reality-based situation than their reports. And there's scientific evidence.
And for yourself?
What do I want?
What's next? What do you want for yourself? You have 1 minute to tell us.
Oh, okay. Hope to go to Cannes. Hope to go and really go out there in the world with the movie. More, I'm kidding, but yeah, certainly just bring the movie out to the world and finishing it up, and to return in August to film and continue the movie, and write the next book.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and
Thank
wish you
you.
a lot of luck on this one.
Thank you so much, Dave. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. I'd like to thank Irene Zabytko for joining us tonight. You've been watching CAN TV, a community forum, a service of CAN TV. Tune into Community Forum for local issues and concerns every Saturday from 8 until 9 p.m. on CAN TV 24. I'm Dave Kraft. Thank you for joining us. And again, thank you.
Thank you.